The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Sofia Rodriguez's shoulders as she stood at the base of the Maricopa County Courthouse steps. At 9:47 a.m., the temperature had already climbed to 94 degrees, but the heat wasn't what made sweat trickle down her spine. It was fear, raw, paralyzing fear that had become her constant companion for the past 6 months. "Mommy, I don't want to go." Emma's voice was barely a whisper, so soft that Sofia almost didn't hear it over the cacophony of sounds swirling around them. Reporters shouting questions, cameras clicking, protesters chanting both for and against the police. Her 3-year-old daughter pressed against her leg, trying to disappear into the fabric of Sofia's only good dress, a navy blue number she'd worn to her wedding 7 years ago. It still fit, but only because stress had stolen 15 pounds from her frame. "I know me, Amber, I know." Sofia stroked Emma's dark curls so much like her father's. "But we have to, for Pappy." The mention of Miguel made Emma's grip tighten on her mother's hand. Those tiny fingers, still pudgy with toddler softness, squeezed with surprising strength. Sofia's heart cracked a little more, which seemed impossible given how shattered it already was. Their lawyer, James Chen, stood beside them in his crisp gray suit, his leather briefcase catching the sunlight. He'd been kind to them, kinder than Sofia had expected when the civil rights organization first assigned him to their case. He'd visited Miguel in the rehabilitation center, brought Emma coloring books, never once made Sofia feel stupid for not understanding legal jargon. Now he touched her elbow gently. "We need to move inside," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The hearing starts in 10 minutes and we can't be late, not today." Sofia nodded, unable to trust her voice. She'd been doing that a lot lately, nodding, agreeing, going through motions while her mind remained trapped in that horrible night 6 months ago. February 15th, 2:17 a.m., the night everything shattered. The police had come with a battering ram, looking for a drug dealer who hadn't lived at their address in 3 years. But the warrant said 4255 East Washington Street, and that was their home, so they came. They came with body armor and assault rifles and spotlights that turned night into day. They came with a dog. Miguel had stumbled out of bed, disoriented and terrified. "Policia, get down, get down." The commands came in English and Spanish, overlapping, contradicting, confusing. Their German shepherd, Max, sweet, gentle Max, who let Emma use him as a pillow, had barked frantically. The police dog had lunged. Max had tried to protect Miguel. Then came the gunshots. Emma had screamed and screamed and screamed. Sofia forced herself back to the present, blinking against the phoenix sunlight and the sting of tears she refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of the cameras. The media had already painted them in so many different ways. Victims, liars, cop haters, martyrs. She wouldn't give them her tears too. "Come on, baby," she whispered to Emma, taking the first step upward. The courthouse steps seemed endless. 23 concrete stairs, each one feeling like a mountain. Sofia had counted them during their first visit with James, had focused on numbers instead of the crushing weight of what they were about to face. A preliminary hearing to determine if their lawsuit against the Phoenix Police Department could move forward. James said they had a strong case. Excessive force, wrong address, permanent injuries. But strong cases didn't always win, not against the police, not in Arizona. They were halfway up when Sofia felt Emma stop moving. "Mommy." Her daughter's voice had changed, gone tight with something Sofia recognized immediately. Panic. "What is it, Amber?" Sofia followed Emma's gaze and felt her own blood turn to ice. There, at the top of the steps near the security checkpoint, stood a police officer with a dog. Not just any dog. A Belgian Malinois, bigger and more muscular than Max, with a sleek tan coat and black markings that made him look like he was wearing a mask. The dog sat in perfect formation beside his handler, a tall officer with buzzed blonde hair and wraparound sunglasses. Both stood absolutely still, professional and intimidating. Emma's breathing quickened. Sophia could feel her daughter's pulse racing through their joined hands. "No, no, no," Emma whimpered, the words coming faster. "No dog, no police dog, Mommy, no." People around them started to notice. The crowd, which had been flowing steadily up the steps, began to pause. Reporters' heads turned. A camera crew swiveled toward them. "It's okay," Sophia said, kneeling down despite the heat radiating from the concrete. She cupped Emma's face in her hands, forcing eye contact. "That's a different dog, baby. That's not the dog from our house. And he's just doing his job. He's not going to hurt anyone." But even as she spoke the words, Sophia didn't believe them. How could she? The last police dog Emma had seen had been straining against a leash while officers beat Miguel on their kitchen floor. That dog's barking had mixed with her husband's cries, with Max's yelping, with Emma's screams, creating a symphony of trauma that played on loop in all their nightmares. Emma's eyes were locked on the Belgian Malinois at the top of the steps. The little girl stood frozen, her chest heaving with rapid breaths that Sophia recognized from the panic attacks that had become routine. The therapist called it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, in a 3-year-old. James Chen noticed the situation unfolding and moved closer, creating a subtle barrier between Emma and the cameras that were definitely recording now. "Sophia, we can wait. We can ask for another continuance." "No," Sophia's voice came out stronger than she felt. "No more delays. Miguel deserves this. We deserve this." She looked back at Emma, at her baby girl who used to laugh and dance and sing, who now barely spoke above a whisper. 6 months of therapy. 6 months of nightmares. 6 months of Emma asking when Pappy would come home from the hospital, and not understanding why he couldn't walk right anymore, couldn't remember things, couldn't be the father who'd tossed her in the air and caught her, who'd read her bedtime stories in his deep, warm voice. "We can do this," Sophia whispered, more to herself than to Emma. "We have to do this." But Emma wasn't listening. Her eyes remained fixed on Titan, the police dog at the top of the steps, the dog who represented everything that had destroyed their lives, the dog who was just sitting there, waiting, watching. And then something shifted in Emma's expression. The fear was still there, but underneath it, Sophia saw something else, something she hadn't seen in her daughter's eyes since that terrible night. Determination. Emma's breathing slowed. Her grip on Sophia's hand loosened slightly. The little girl tilted her head, studying the police dog with an intensity that made Sophia's breath catch. "Emma," Sophia's voice trembled. "Baby, what are you thinking?" But Emma didn't answer. She just kept staring at that dog, her 3-year-old mind working through something that the adults around her couldn't see. The crowd continued to watch. The cameras continued to record. And at the top of the courthouse steps, the police dog named Titan sat perfectly still, his intelligent eyes tracking the small girl in the pink dress who seemed unable to look away. Neither Sophia, nor James, nor anyone else in that crowd could have predicted what would happen next. They couldn't have known that this moment, this frozen tableau of trauma and fear on the courthouse steps, was about to transform into something that would change everything. Emma was about to speak, and when she did, prosecutors would sit down slowly, police officers would question everything they thought they knew, and a city would be forced to confront an uncomfortable truth that had been hiding in plain sight. But in this moment, all Sophia could do was hold her daughter's hand and pray that whatever came next wouldn't break them any more than they'd already been broken. Officer Derek Kane had been a K-9 handler for 8 years, and in that time, he'd learned to read situations before they escalated. It was a survival skill in his line of work, knowing when a suspect was about to run, when a crowd was about to turn hostile, when a routine call was about to go sideways. He developed a sixth sense for trouble. That's why he noticed the little girl immediately. She stood halfway up the courthouse steps, frozen like a deer in headlights, staring directly at Titan. At first, Kane thought she was just one of those kids who got excited about police dogs. It happened all the time. children pointing, waving, asking their parents if they could pet the puppy. Kane usually smiled politely and explained that Titan was working, that police dogs couldn't be distracted. But this was different. This child wasn't excited, she was terrified. Kane felt Titan shift slightly beneath his hand. The Belgian Malinois had noticed too. After thousands of hours of training and hundreds of operations together, Kane and Titan communicated in ways that went beyond verbal commands. He felt the dog's muscles tense, sensed his heightened awareness. Titan wasn't showing aggression. He'd never show aggression without a command, but he was alert, locked in. "Easy boy," Kane murmured, his hand steady on Titan's collar. "Just a kid." But even as he said it, Kane felt something uncomfortable twist in his gut. The woman kneeling beside the child looked familiar. Dark hair, late 20s, wearing a dress that had seen better days. There was something about her face, about the way she held herself with dignity despite obvious fear, that tugged at Kane's memory. Then he saw the man standing nearby in the expensive suit. Asian, early 40s, carrying a leather briefcase with the logo of the Arizona Civil Liberties Union embossed on the side. A lawyer, civil rights lawyer. Kane's stomach dropped. Rodriguez, the name hit him like a physical blow. This was the Rodriguez family, the case every cop in Phoenix had been talking about for 6 months, the wrong address raid, the excessive force allegations, the family whose German shepherd had been shot, whose father had been. Kane stopped that thought before it could complete. He'd heard different versions of what happened that night from different officers. Some said Miguel Rodriguez had been combative, that the force was justified. Others whispered that it had been a clusterfuck from start to finish, that supervisors had screwed up the warrant, that the entry team had panicked when the family dog started barking. Kane hadn't been there. He didn't know the truth. But looking at this little girl's face, pale, sweating, eyes wide with unmistakable trauma, he knew that whatever had happened had destroyed her world. And now she was staring at his dog like Titan was a monster. "Sir," a courthouse security guard appeared at Kane's elbow. "Is there a problem?" "No problem," Kane said automatically, though his eyes never left the Rodriguez family. "Just maintaining position." The security guard followed his gaze and grimaced. "Oh man, that's the Rodriguez kid, isn't it? The one from the case." Kane didn't answer. He was watching the little girl's chest rise and fall in rapid, shallow breaths. Panic attack. He'd seen enough of them to recognize the signs. Her mother was talking to her, trying to calm her down, but the girl's eyes remained locked on Titan. The crowd on the courthouse steps had slowed to a crawl. People were noticing now, pulling out phones, whispering to each other. Kane recognized a few reporters in the mix, their cameras already recording. This was exactly what he didn't need, a viral video of a traumatized child having a breakdown in front of a police dog. "Maybe we should move," the security guard suggested. "Take Titan around to the side entrance." "No," Kane surprised himself with the firmness of his response. "We're assigned to this entrance. We don't move unless there's a direct threat." But that wasn't the real reason he didn't want to move. The truth was, Kane felt rooted to the spot, compelled to witness whatever was about to happen. This little girl, Emma, he remembered her name from the news coverage, had every right to be afraid of police dogs. She had every right to hate them. And if moving Titan out of sight would make this easier for her, Kane should absolutely do it. Yet something kept him still. Emma's mother, Sophia, that was her name, was still kneeling on the concrete, her hands on her daughter's shoulders. The lawyer had positioned himself to block some of the camera angles, which Kane appreciated. At least someone was thinking about the kid's privacy. Then Emma did something unexpected. She stopped hyperventilating. Just like that, her breathing slowed. The panicked, rapid-fire breaths that had been escalating toward a full meltdown suddenly steadied into something deeper, more controlled. Her small shoulders squared, her spine straightened. Kane had seen plenty of people overcome fear in high-pressure situations. He'd watched suspects talk themselves into surrendering, seen victims find courage to testify, observed officers push through terror to do their jobs. But he'd never seen anything quite like what he was witnessing now. This 3-year-old child was choosing to be brave. Sophia noticed too. Kane saw confusion flicker across her face, followed by concern. She said something to Emma in Spanish, too quiet for Kane to hear, but Emma didn't respond. The little girl's entire focus remained on Titan. Titan, for his part, sat perfectly still. The Belgian Malinois was trained to remain calm in chaotic environments, to ignore distractions, to wait for commands. But Kane felt something different in his partner now. Titan's ears were forward, his head tilted slightly. The dog was curious. No, that wasn't quite right. It was more like recognition. Like Titan understood on some instinctive level that this tiny human had been hurt by someone like him. "What's she doing?" the security guard muttered. Kane didn't answer because he didn't know. Emma had released her mother's hand. Sophia made a small sound of distress and was now standing completely still. The morning sun caught the sequins on her pink dress, making her sparkle like something fragile and precious. For a long moment, nothing happened. The crowd held its breath. Cameras recorded. Somewhere in the distance, Phoenix traffic hummed along, oblivious to the drama unfolding on these courthouse steps. Then Emma took a step forward. "Emma, no." Sophia's voice cracked with fear, but the little girl didn't stop. Kane's hand tightened on Titan's collar. His training kicked in automatically: assess the threat, evaluate the approach, prepare to respond. But even as his body tensed, his mind screamed that this was wrong. This child wasn't a threat. She was barely 3 feet tall, wearing light-up sneakers that blinked pink with each step. She weighed maybe 30 pounds. She was no danger to Titan or anyone else. But she'd been traumatized by a police dog, and trauma made people unpredictable. "Officer," the security guard's voice was tight, "should we?" "Nobody moves," Kane commanded, surprised by the authority in his voice. "Let her come." He saw Sophia lunge forward, saw the lawyer catch her arm. Good. The last thing this situation needed was adults panicking and turning this into a scene. Emma needed space. Whatever she was doing, whatever demon she was facing, she needed to face it on her own terms. Another step, then another. Emma walked with eerie calm, like she was approaching an old friend rather than an animal that represented her worst nightmares. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a clear path between the little girl and the police dog. Someone's phone clattered on the concrete. A woman gasped. Kane kept his eyes on Emma's hands, watching for sudden movements, for anything that might spook Titan. But the girl's arms hung loose at her sides. Her face, which had been twisted with fear moments ago, now showed something else entirely. Sadness, deep, soul-crushing sadness that no 3-year-old should ever have to carry. She stopped 3 feet away from Titan, close enough to touch but not touching, close enough to smell the dog's scent, to see the rise and fall of his chest, to count the whiskers on his muzzle. Titan's tail gave the smallest twitch, not a wag exactly, more like an acknowledgement. "I see you too, little human." Then Emma did something that made Kane's throat tighten. She sat down. Right there on the hot concrete steps, the little girl in the pink dress crossed her legs, straightened her back, and assumed the exact position that Titan held, sitting, waiting, watching. The dog and the child stared at each other in absolute silence. And in that moment, Kane understood that whatever happened next would change everything. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. Nothing moved on the courthouse steps except the slight flutter of Emma's dark curls in the hot Arizona breeze. Sophia's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her ribcage. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to rush forward, to scoop Emma into her arms and run far away from this place, from this dog, from everything that reminded them of that terrible night. But James Chen's hand remained firm on her elbow, holding her in place with surprising strength for a man who spent his days in courtrooms rather than gyms. "Trust her," he whispered, though his voice carried doubt. "Just trust her." Trust her to what? Confront a trained police dog, process trauma that adult therapists struggled to address, be braver than any 3-year-old should ever have to be. But Sophia stayed still, even as her fingernails dug crescents into her palms. Emma and Titan continued their strange starring contest. The Belgian Malinois hadn't moved a muscle since the little girl sat down. His tail lay flat against the concrete, his ears remained forward, his dark eyes fixed on the small human who'd positioned herself as his mirror image. Officer Kane stood like a statue beside his partner, one hand still resting on Titan's collar, the other hanging loose at his side. The crowd that had been climbing the courthouse steps now formed a loose semicircle around the scene, everyone instinctively maintaining distance while straining to see what would happen next. Cell phones captured every moment from multiple angles. A news crew that had been interviewing protesters about police brutality swiveled their camera toward this unexpected drama. Inside the courthouse, security monitors displayed the scene unfolding outside. Guards called their supervisors. Supervisors called administrators. Administrators peered at screens and debated whether to intervene. In courtroom 4B, where the Rodriguez preliminary hearing was scheduled to begin in 7 minutes, a clerk noticed the commotion on the security feed and alerted the bailiff. But outside, in the bubble of silence that had formed around Emma and Titan, none of that mattered. Emma studied the dog with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so young. Her eyes traced the strong lines of his shoulders, the alert positioning of his ears, the calm intelligence in his gaze. She saw the badge clipped to his working vest, the Phoenix Police Department logo that matched the ones on the officers' uniforms from that night. But she also saw something else, something the adults around her had forgotten to look for. She saw a dog, just a dog. Not a weapon, not a monster, not a machine programmed to hurt. A living, breathing animal who followed commands because that's what dogs did when they loved their humans. Max followed her father's commands: sit, stay, come, leave it. This police dog followed his officer's commands. They were the same, really. Both just dogs trying to be good. Emma's chest still felt tight and her hands still trembled slightly, but the crushing panic had loosened its grip. She breathed in slowly through her nose, the way Dr. Martinez had taught her during therapy. Count to 4. Hold. Count to 4. Release. The breathing exercises usually didn't help much, but now, sitting here with this dog who was so still and patient, they seemed to work better. Titan's nostrils flared slightly. He was scenting her, Emma realized. Dogs did that. Max always sniffed her when she came home from preschool, checking where she'd been and what she'd touched. This police dog was doing the same thing, learning about her, figuring out if she was scared or angry or sad. Emma was all three. Officer Kane felt sweat trickle down his back, and it had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. He'd been in tense situations before, armed standoffs, riots, searches in dangerous neighborhoods, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. This little girl, this tiny child who had every reason to hate police dogs, was sitting perfectly still, communicating with Titan in a language Kane barely understood. He'd trained Titan on dozens of commands: attack, search, track, find, release. But he'd never taught the dog compassion. That wasn't part of the program. Police dogs were tools, extensions of officer safety protocols, living weapons deployed to control situations and protect lives. Except right now, Titan didn't look like a weapon. He looked like what he was, a 5-year-old Belgian Malinois who'd been bred and trained to follow commands, who slept in Kane's house, who played with Kong toys in the backyard, who got excited about car rides and treats. Just a dog. Emma shifted slightly, uncrossing her legs and pulling her knees up to her chest. She wrapped her small arms around her shins, making herself even smaller. The movement made several people in the crowd gasp. Was she afraid? About to run? But Emma didn't look frightened anymore. She looked thoughtful in that peculiar way children sometimes do when they're working through complex emotions they don't have words for yet. Titan's head tilted to one side, a distinctly unpoliced dog-like gesture. Kane felt the question in his partner's posture. What is this small human doing? Can I approach? Do you want me to respond? Kane didn't give any command. He just held Titan's collar loosely, letting the dog know he was there but not restricting him. This was uncharted territory for both of them. Sophia's lawyer, James Chen, had pulled out his phone and was typing frantically with one hand while maintaining his grip on Sophia with the other. She glanced at his screen and saw he was texting someone in the courthouse. Delay the hearing. Something happening outside. Rodriguez kid and police dog. Need time. The reply came immediately. Judge Morrison wants status update. Prosecution asking what's going on. James typed back, just wait, trust me, this is important. Important how? Sophia wanted to scream. Important because her daughter was having a breakdown in front of 50 witnesses and a dozen cameras. Important because this would give the defense attorneys more ammunition to paint Emma as unstable, their family as drama seekers, their lawsuit as frivolous. But even as those angry thoughts swirled through Sophia's mind, she couldn't tear her eyes away from her daughter, because Emma's face had changed again. The sadness remained, but something else had crept in underneath it. Recognition, understanding, and perhaps most striking of all, empathy. Emma was 3 years old. She still believed in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. She thought clouds were made of cotton candy and that her stuffed animals came alive when she wasn't looking. She was barely old enough to tie her own shoes or write her own name. But in this moment, sitting on the courthouse steps facing a police dog, while the adult world held its breath around her, Emma Rodriguez understood something profound that most grown-ups had forgotten. Dogs didn't choose to hurt people. People chose to use dogs to hurt people. The distinction seemed simple, almost childish. But it was the difference between blaming a gun and blaming the shooter, between fearing the tool and questioning the hand that wielded it. Emma's lips parted slightly. She was going to speak. Sophia could tell by the way her daughter's shoulders straightened, by the determined set of her small jaw. After 6 months of whispers and silence and words that came out broken and scared, Emma was about to say something. Officer Kane saw it too. His entire body tensed. Titan's ears swiveled forward, catching the subtle shift in Emma's breathing that signaled vocalization. The cameras zoomed in. The crowd leaned closer. Inside the courthouse, people crowded around security monitors. In courtroom 4B, Judge Morrison's clerk held up a hand, forestalling the start of proceedings. Everyone waited. And then Emma Rodriguez, 3 years old and 50 pounds soaking wet, spoke words that would be replayed on news networks across the country, quoted in think pieces and policy debates, and remembered long after everyone had forgotten the specific details of the lawsuit that brought her to these courthouse steps. Emma's voice cut through the morning air like a bell ringing in an empty church, clear, pure, and impossibly loud for someone so small. "You're a good dog." 4 words. Simple, declarative, spoken with the absolute certainty that only young children possess when they believe something to be fundamentally true. Officer Derek Kane felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Titan's ears twitched. The Belgian Malinois remained seated, but his tail lifted slightly off the concrete, the very tip moving in the smallest suggestion of a wag. Dogs understood tone before words, and Emma's tone carried no threat, no fear, only truth. "You're a good dog," Emma repeated, her voice growing stronger. "You didn't want to hurt anybody." Sophia's knees buckled. James Chen caught her before she fell, his expensive leather briefcase hitting the ground with a thud that nobody noticed. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob that came from somewhere deep in her chest. Those were the first full sentences, real, complete, purposeful sentences, that Emma had spoken since February 15th. 6 months. 183 days of therapy sessions and doctor visits and sleeping with the lights on. 183 days of Emma pointing at things she wanted instead of asking, of nodding or shaking her head instead of speaking, of humming wordlessly instead of singing the songs she used to love. And now, sitting on courthouse steps in front of a police dog, Emma had found her voice. "They made you," Emma continued, and her small hand lifted, pointing at Officer Kane, not accusingly, just factually. "The people make you do things, you're just a dog." Kane's throat closed up. He couldn't have spoken if he'd wanted to. This child, this baby, really, had just articulated something that had been gnawing at the edges of his conscience for months, something he'd been too afraid or too proud to confront directly. Titan was a good dog, the best dog Kane had ever worked with. Loyal, intelligent, responsive, brave. Titan had saved Kane's life twice, once by detecting an armed suspect hiding in an attic, once by alerting to a suspicious package that turned out to contain an explosive device. Kane loved Titan, trusted him with his life. But Titan was also a weapon Kane deployed on command, without always questioning whether deployment was necessary. A weapon that followed orders because dogs lived to please their handlers, not because they understood the moral complexity of when force was justified. Emma wasn't done. She turned her gaze from Kane back to Titan, and tears began streaming down her cheeks, fat droplets that caught the sunlight and sparkled before falling onto her pink dress. "My Max didn't want to hurt anybody either," she said, her voice cracking. "He was just protecting my pappy. He was scared. The police came in our house and Max thought bad guys were hurting Daddy. Max was trying to be good. He was trying to protect us." The crowd had gone completely silent. Not a single phone buzzed. Not a single person whispered. Even the traffic noise from the street below seemed to fade away, as if the entire city of Phoenix was holding its breath to hear what this 3-year-old had to say. Sophia was openly crying now, silent tears running mascara down her cheeks. James Chen's eyes glistened behind his glasses. Several reporters wiped at their faces. A courthouse security guard turned away, his shoulders shaking. Inside the courthouse, the scene was playing out on every security monitor. In courtroom 4B, District Attorney Michael Breslin stood beside the prosecution table, his tablet in hand, watching the live feed that his assistant had pulled up. He'd been reviewing his opening arguments, preparing to defend the Phoenix Police Department's actions on the night of February 15th. Preparing to argue that the officers had followed protocol, that force was justified, that the Rodriguez family's injuries, however regrettable, were the result of their own dog's aggression and Miguel Rodriguez's failure to comply immediately with commands. But now, watching this tiny girl speak truth to a police dog on the courthouse steps, Breslin felt every word of his prepared argument turn to ash in his mouth. Emma reached out slowly, telegraphing her movement the way children do when they've been taught to be careful around animals. Her small hand extended toward Titan, palm up, fingers slightly curled. The universal gesture of peace between humans and dogs. "Does your police person love you?" Emma asked, and the question was so genuine, so earnest, that it pierced straight through every adult heart within hearing distance. Kane's vision blurred. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Emma seemed to understand the gesture. "My pappy loved Max so much. Max loved my pappy. They were best friends. Pappy taught Max tricks. They played fetch in the backyard. Max slept by Pappy's bed every night to keep him safe." She paused, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Such a normal, childish gesture that it made the moment somehow more heartbreaking. "But the police shot Max. They hurt Pappy real bad, and Max was just trying to be a good dog. Your dog would do the same thing if bad guys hurt you. Dogs protect their people. That's what dogs do." The logic was simple, childishly simple, but its simplicity didn't make it any less devastating. Officer Kane made a decision that would probably get him reprimanded, possibly suspended, maybe even cost him his position as a K-9 handler. He didn't care. Some things mattered more than protocol. He released Titan's collar and gave the hand signal for free. Titan knew what free meant. It meant he was off duty. It meant he could be a dog instead of a police dog. It meant he could interact naturally instead of remaining in rigid working mode. The Belgian Malinois stood slowly, stretching his front legs forward in a play bow that was pure canine body language. I am not a threat. I want to be friends. Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile Sophia had seen in 6 months. Titan approached carefully, lowering his head as he got close. He sniffed Emma's extended hand, his tail wagging properly now, his entire demeanor shifting from professional police dog to just dog. Emma giggled, actually giggled, and the sound was so unexpected, so beautiful, that Sophia broke down completely. James Chen put his arm around her shoulders, no longer lawyer and client but simply two humans witnessing something profound. "Hi, Titan," Emma whispered, reading the name off the dog's vest. "It's okay, it's not your fault, you're a good boy." She placed her small hand on top of Titan's head, between his ears, in the exact spot where Miguel used to pet Max. The gesture was so familiar, so natural, that for a moment Sophia could almost see her husband standing there, whole and healthy and laughing at their daughter's fearlessness. But Miguel wasn't there. Miguel was in a rehabilitation facility, relearning how to feed himself, struggling to remember the names of his own family members, dealing with traumatic brain injury that would affect him for the rest of his life. Because officers had made a mistake, because they'd gone to the wrong house, because they'd relied on force instead of verification, because they'd deployed dogs as weapons instead of taking time to confirm the situation. Emma seemed to be thinking along similar lines. She looked up at Officer Kane, her hand still resting on Titan's head. "You should tell your dog he's good," she said seriously. "You should tell him every day, because when bad things happen the dogs think it's their fault, but it's not. It's the people's fault. People make choices. Dogs just love their people and try to make them happy." Kane finally found his voice. It came out rough, choked with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "You're right," he managed. "You're absolutely right." Inside courtroom 4B, District Attorney Michael Breslin set down his tablet with shaking hands. He looked at his co-counsel, Sarah Park, who had tears running down her face. He looked at the defense table, where James Chen's second chair was watching the same feed with an expression of stunned disbelief. Then Breslin did something he'd never done in 15 years as a prosecutor. He sat down slowly in his chair, put his head in his hands, and admitted to himself that he was on the wrong side. The video hit social media at 10:04 a.m., exactly 17 minutes after Emma Rodriguez first sat down on the courthouse steps. A bystander named Marcus Chen, no relation to James Chen, had started recording the moment he noticed the little girl frozen in front of the police dog. He'd been at the courthouse fighting a traffic ticket, had wandered outside for a cigarette, and had stumbled onto a scene that made him forget all about his citation. His hands had shaken as he held up his phone, capturing every word Emma spoke. Now, sitting in his parked car, Marcus uploaded the video to Twitter with a simple caption: 3-year-old victim of wrong address raid confronts police dog. Listen to what she says. The first share came within 30 seconds, then 10 more, then 100. By 10:07 it had been retweeted 5,000 times. By 10:15 it was trending in Phoenix. By 10:23 it was trending nationally. Emma Rodriguez. They made you. Police reform. Justice for Emma. Inside courtroom 4B, bailiff Marcus Thompson noticed his phone buzzing incessantly in his pocket. He ignored it. Phones were supposed to be silenced during proceedings. But the persistent vibration finally made him glance at the screen during a moment when Judge Rachel Morrison was reviewing paperwork. His sister had texted him, "Turn on the news. That Rodriguez case you're working. Holy shit." Thompson frowned and pocketed his phone again, but the message nagged at him. His sister wasn't prone to dramatics. If she said "holy shit" about a case, something significant had happened. District Attorney Michael Breslin sat at the prosecution table, his carefully organized files spread before him like the remnants of a battle plan that no longer made sense. He'd watched Emma's interaction with the police dog 3 times now on his tablet. Each viewing hit harder than the last. His daughter Lily was also 3 years old. She'd be starting preschool in the fall. She loved dogs, begged constantly for a puppy even though Breslin's wife kept saying they weren't ready for that responsibility. Lily's favorite book was about a rescue dog who saved a family from a fire. She made Breslin read it every night, and every night she'd point to the hero dog and say, "Good dog, Daddy. He's such a good dog." Breslin imagined someone breaking into his house at 2 a.m., imagined armed men shouting commands, imagined his wife screaming, Lily crying, imagine if they'd had a dog and it tried to protect them. Imagined Lily 6 months later, traumatized and silent, finally finding her voice to explain what the adults had been too caught up in procedure and policy to see clearly. Dogs weren't the problem. The people giving the orders were. Michael, Sarah Park touched his arm gently. His co-counsel had been with the DA's office for 3 years, sharp and ambitious and usually unflappable, but her voice trembled now. "Have you seen social media?" Breslin nodded slowly. "It's everywhere," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper so the defense table wouldn't hear. "CNN just picked it up, Fox News, MSNBC. The Phoenix mayor's office is getting flooded with calls. The police chief's Twitter mentions are—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Michael, we can't proceed with this hearing. Not now, not after that." "I know," Breslin said quietly. At the defense table, James Chen's phone buzzed with a call from his supervisor at the Arizona Civil Liberties Union. He stepped into the hallway to answer. "James, what the hell is happening?" His boss, Patricia Williams, sounded breathless. "I've got 12 news outlets asking for statements about your client's daughter, something about a police dog." "It just happened," James said, leaning against the hallway wall. "Emma, the little girl, she spoke to a police K-9 outside the courthouse. Said things that—" He paused, searching for words. "Said things that cut right to the heart of everything wrong with this case." "I'm watching it now," Patricia said, and James could hear the emotion in her voice. "James, this is— God, this is powerful. This changes the entire narrative. The public sees a traumatized child finding her voice to defend dogs while indicting the system. This isn't about one wrong address anymore. This is about how we use force, how we deploy animals as weapons, how we prioritize officer safety over civilian lives." "I know," James said. "But Patricia, I'm worried about Emma. She's 3 years old. She shouldn't be the face of police reform. She should be playing with dolls and learning her ABCs, not explaining trauma to the world." "Sometimes change comes from unexpected places," Patricia replied gently. "Sometimes it takes the voice of a child to say what adults are too scared or jaded to say. Remember Ruby Bridges. Remember the children of Birmingham. Emma isn't trying to be an activist. She's just trying to make sense of what happened to her family. But her truth is resonating because it's uncomplicated by politics or legal strategy. She just sees clearly." Back in the courtroom, Judge Rachel Morrison entered from her chambers. Everyone stood automatically. The judge, a stern woman in her late 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes, had reviewed the Rodriguez case extensively. She'd read every brief, studied every piece of evidence, prepared herself for what promised to be a contentious preliminary hearing. But something was different now. She could feel it in the room's atmosphere, a tension that hadn't been there during the morning's pre-session conference. "Be seated," Judge Morrison said, settling into her chair. She looked at both tables. Before we begin, are there any preliminary matters either side needs to address? Breslin stood slowly, very slowly, like a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Your Honor, the state would like to request an immediate recess. Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. Mr. Breslin, we've delayed this hearing twice already at the defense's request. Now you want a recess before we've even started. Yes, Your Honor. Breslin's voice was steady, but James Chen noticed his hands gripping the table's edge. New information has come to light that requires the state to reassess our position. New information. Judge Morrison leaned forward. What new information? This incident occurred 6 months ago. Discovery closed weeks ago. What could possibly? Her clerk leaned over and whispered something, showing the judge a tablet. Morrison's expression shifted as she watched Emma's video. She watched it completely, without interruption. When it ended, she set the tablet down very carefully. I see, she said quietly. Mr. Chen, do you object to a recess? James Chen stood. No, Your Honor, though I'd like to know what the prosecution intends to do with this time. Breslin turned to face him directly. I intend to have conversations with my superiors, with the police department, and with my conscience about whether defending the actions that led to your client's injuries is the right thing to do. The courtroom went silent. Bailiff Thompson's mouth fell open. The court reporter's fingers froze over her keys. Sarah Park stared at Breslin like he'd grown a second head. Judge Morrison studied Breslin carefully. In 15 years on the bench, she'd seen him prosecute hundreds of cases. He was thorough, aggressive, and rarely admitted doubt about anything. This was unprecedented. Mr. Breslin, she said slowly, are you saying the state is considering settling this case? I'm saying, Your Honor, that I just watched a 3-year-old child explain something that all of us, myself included, have been willfully ignoring. Breslin's voice grew stronger. She said dogs aren't responsible for following commands. People are responsible for giving those commands. And when those commands result in shooting a family pet and permanently injuring an innocent man in his own home because we got the address wrong, he paused. Then maybe the people giving those commands need to be held accountable, instead of defending ourselves with procedure and protocol. Judge Morrison sat back in her chair. In 30 years of practicing and presiding over law, she'd never heard a prosecutor speak like this during active litigation. How much time do you need? She asked. A week, Breslin said. Maybe 2. I need to talk to the police chief, the city attorney, the mayor's office. This case has become bigger than a preliminary hearing. It's about systemic reform, James Chen finished, his voice carrying grudging respect for Breslin's candor. Yes, Breslin agreed, meeting Chen's eyes directly. Systemic reform. By noon, Emma Rodriguez's face was on every major news network in America. CNN played the video on loop, with legal analysts debating its implications for qualified immunity and police accountability. Fox News brought in law enforcement experts who admitted, some reluctantly, some readily, that the child had articulated a truth they'd been dancing around for years. MSNBC interviewed civil rights leaders who called Emma's words the most honest assessment of police militarization we've heard in a generation. Sofia Rodriguez sat in James Chen's office, watching her daughter become a symbol she'd never asked to be. Emma was downstairs in the building's break room with James's paralegal, Maria, eating animal crackers and watching cartoons, blissfully unaware that millions of people were now discussing her words. How do we protect her from this? Sofia asked, her voice raw from crying. She's 3 years old, James. She shouldn't be on the news. She shouldn't be a hashtag. She should be anonymous. James nodded sympathetically. I know, but Sofia, we can't put the genie back in the bottle. That video is out there, but we can control the narrative. We can make sure Emma isn't exploited, that her message isn't twisted, that this stays focused on reform rather than spectacle. His phone rang for the 15th time that hour. He glanced at the screen and his eyebrows shot up. It's the mayor's office. Sophia's heart hammered. Answer it. James put it on speaker. James Chen. Mr. Chen, this is David Palmer, Chief of Staff to Mayor Williams. The mayor would like to meet with you and your clients tomorrow morning to discuss a path forward for the Rodriguez case. A path forward. James kept his voice neutral, lawyerly. Could you be more specific? There was a pause. Sophia could hear muffled voices in the background, someone giving Palmer instructions. When he came back on the line, his tone had shifted, less official, more human. Mr. Chen, the mayor watched that video of Emma Rodriguez. So did the city council. So did the police chief. So did everyone in this city who has a heart. We'd like to discuss settlement terms and, more importantly, policy reforms that address the systemic issues your case has highlighted. James looked at Sophia. She nodded frantically. We're available tomorrow, James said. 9 a.m. 9 a.m. City Hall, third floor conference room. Mr. Chen, Palmer's voice dropped. Tell Mrs. Rodriguez that the mayor cried watching that video. She has a 3-year-old grandson. She understands. The line went dead. Sophia covered her face with her hands. Oh my God, is this real? Are they actually listening? They don't have a choice, James said quietly. Emma gave them no choice. Across town, Officer Derek Kane sat in Police Chief Jennifer Martinez's office, still in his uniform, Titan lying at his feet. The K-9 handler had been summoned immediately after the courthouse incident. He'd expected a reprimand for releasing Titan from duty, for allowing an interaction that wasn't protocol, for creating a public relations nightmare. Instead, Chief Martinez had watched Emma's video 3 times in his presence without saying a word. Finally, she spoke. How long have you been a K-9 handler, Derek? 8 years, ma'am. And in those 8 years, how many times have you deployed Titan in situations that, in hindsight, probably didn't require a dog? Kane's throat tightened. Ma'am, I'm not asking for an official statement. I'm asking as one officer to another. How many times? Kane thought about domestic disturbance calls where Titan's presence had escalated fear rather than diffusing it. He thought about traffic stops where he'd brought Titan out to intimidate drivers into compliance. He thought about the Rodriguez raid, where he hadn't been present but knew the officers involved, knew their mindset, knew how they'd been trained to use K-9 units. Too many times, he admitted quietly. Way too many times. Chief Martinez nodded. That little girl said something today that I need you to help me understand. She said, they made you. She was talking about Titan, about how dogs follow commands without moral judgment. But Derek, we've been training our K-9 handlers, training you to think of these dogs as tools rather than partners, as force multipliers rather than living beings. And when something goes wrong, we blame the dog's aggression or the suspect's noncompliance. We never blame the system that told you to deploy Titan in the first place. Kane felt something crack open inside his chest. Ma'am, what are you saying? I'm saying I want you to head a complete overhaul of our K-9 program. I want you to work with community leaders, with animal welfare experts, with the Rodriguez family if they're willing. I want you to help us figure out how to use police dogs ethically, when to deploy them, when not to, how to train handlers to see them as partners deserving of moral consideration, not just weapons. Why me? Kane asked. I'm part of the problem. 'Cause you let Titan approach that little girl today when protocol said you shouldn't. Because you saw her humanity and responded to it. Because Titan trusted you enough to be gentle with a traumatized child. That tells me you understand something essential about this partnership that our current training doesn't emphasize. Chief Martinez leaned forward. That little girl forgave your dog for existing in a system that weaponized him. Can you forgive yourself enough to help us build a better system? Kane looked down at Titan, who gazed back with those intelligent brown eyes. Yes, ma'am, I can try. That evening, Miguel Rodriguez watched Emma's video from his rehabilitation center bed. The staff had tried to keep it from him, worried it would be too emotional, but his occupational therapist, Linda, had insisted he deserved to see it. Miguel's hands shook as he held the tablet. His speech was still slurred, his memory still fragmented, his body still broken. But tears streamed down his face as he listened to his daughter, his baby girl, speak with clarity and compassion about dogs and choices and blame. She understands, he managed, the words coming slowly. Emma understands, better than all of us. Linda squeezed his shoulder. She learned it from you, Miguel, from how you loved Max, from how you taught her that dogs are good, that they deserve kindness. She's just applying that lesson to a harder situation than any 3-year-old should have to face. Miguel closed his eyes. Max good. Max is perfect, Linda assured him. Sophia says he sleeps in Emma's room every night now, keeps her nightmares away. Miguel smiled through his tears. Good dog, he thought. Such a good dog. The third-floor conference room in Phoenix City Hall had witnessed countless negotiations over its 30-year existence, union contracts, budget battles, rezoning disputes, but nothing quite like what unfolded on the morning of December 7th. Sophia Rodriguez sat at the massive oak table, flanked by James Chen and 2 other attorneys from the Arizona Civil Liberties Union. Across from them sat Mayor Catherine Williams, Police Chief Jennifer Martinez, City Attorney Robert Foster, and District Attorney Michael Breslin. At the end of the table, somewhat surprisingly, sat Officer Derek Kane. Emma wasn't there. Sophia had insisted on that. Her daughter had said what needed to be said. She didn't need to be paraded through negotiations like a trophy or a weapon. Mayor Williams spoke first. She was a compact woman in her early 60s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen Phoenix transform from a sleepy desert town into a sprawling metropolis. But this morning, those eyes were red-rimmed. Mrs. Rodriguez, she began, her voice steady but soft, I want to start by saying what should have been said 6 months ago. I'm sorry. The city of Phoenix is sorry. What happened to your family was unconscionable, and no amount of legal maneuvering or policy justification can change that fact. Sophia's hands clenched in her lap. She'd waited 6 months to hear those words. 6 months of watching Miguel struggle to relearn basic tasks. 6 months of Emma's nightmares. 6 months of bills piling up, of fighting with insurance companies, of wondering if they'd lose their home. Thank you, she managed, her voice tight. James Chen opened his leather portfolio. We appreciate the mayor's acknowledgement. Now let's discuss how that apology translates into action. For the next hour, they talked numbers. The city's initial settlement offer was substantial, $8 million to cover Miguel's ongoing medical care, lost wages, pain and suffering, and Emma's future therapy needs. James countered with $4.5 million, citing precedent from similar cases in California and New York. But Sophia found herself only half listening to the financial negotiations. Her attention kept drifting to Officer Kane, who sat quietly at the table's end, Titan lying beneath his chair. The dog was technically off duty, but he wore his vest anyway, a compromise that allowed him in the building. Finally, she interrupted. The money matters. Of course it matters. Miguel will need care for the rest of his life, but that's not why we're really here, is it? Everyone turned to look at her. Emma didn't talk about money on those courthouse steps, Sophia continued, her voice growing stronger. She talked about dogs being good, about people making choices, about systems that turn partners into weapons. So before we agree on any dollar amount, I want to know what's going to change, because another family will have the wrong address. Another dog will be shot. Another child will be traumatized, unless something fundamentally changes. Mayor Williams nodded slowly. You're right, which is why Chief Martinez has spent the last week developing a comprehensive reform proposal. Chief. Jennifer Martinez pulled out a thick binder and slid copies across the table. These are preliminary recommendations for K-9 program reform. Officer Kane has been instrumental in developing them. Kane shifted uncomfortably as all eyes turned to him. "I'm not a policy expert," he said, "but I am a K-9 handler who's been doing this wrong for 8 years. So I talked to animal behaviorists, to other handlers across the country who use different models, to community leaders, and we've outlined changes." James Chen flipped through the binder, his eyes widening. "This is comprehensive." "It has to be," Kane said. "The current system is fundamentally flawed. We train dogs to be aggressive, reward them for shows of force, deploy them in situations where their presence escalates rather than de-escalates. Then when something goes wrong, we blame the dog or the victim, never the system." He pulled out his own copy, marked with highlighter and sticky notes. The reforms cover training, deployment protocols, handler selection, civilian oversight, and accountability measures. For example, no more K-9 deployments on residential calls unless there's confirmed violence. No more using dogs to intimidate during traffic stops. Mandatory de-escalation attempts before any K-9 release. Body cameras on all handlers, activated whenever the dog is out of the vehicle. And most importantly, regular psychological evaluations for both dogs and handlers to ensure they're fit for duty. Sophia felt tears prickling her eyes. This was real. This was actually happening. "There's more," Chief Martinez added. "We're proposing a community K-9 program where handlers like Officer Kane bring their dogs to schools, community centers, neighborhoods, not as shows of force, but as educational opportunities. Teaching kids that police dogs are working animals deserving of respect and care, not weapons to be feared. Building trust instead of intimidation." "Emma would love that," Sophia whispered. Kane's voice was rough when he spoke. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I know I can't undo what happened to your family, but Titan and we want to be part of making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Your daughter taught me that dogs don't make choices. We do, and I choose to do better." The room fell silent for a moment. Then City Attorney Foster cleared his throat. "In addition to the K-9 reforms, we're proposing broader changes to how we execute search warrants, triple verification of addresses, mandatory supervisor approval for nighttime raids, crisis intervention team involvement for any call with potential mental health factors, body-worn camera activation from the moment officers arrive on scene, and a civilian review board with real authority to investigate use-of-force incidents." James Chen leaned back in his chair, studying the faces around the table. 20 years as a civil rights attorney had taught him to be skeptical of promises, but something felt different here. Maybe it was Emma's viral video creating public pressure the city couldn't ignore. Maybe it was the genuine emotion he saw in Mayor Williams's eyes. Maybe it was Officer Kane's obvious commitment to change. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the simple truth a 3-year-old had spoken, cutting through layers of bureaucratic defensiveness to reveal what everyone had known all along. The system was broken, and broken things needed to be fixed, not defended. "We need these reforms in writing," James said. "Codified into city ordinance, not just department policy. We need implementation timelines. We need oversight mechanisms. We need consequences for noncompliance." "Agreed," Mayor Williams said immediately. "We'll have the city attorney's office draft formal language within a week." Sophia looked at the settlement figure James had written on his legal pad. $4.2 million, a compromise between the opening positions. Enough to secure Miguel's care, Emma's future, their family's stability. But more than that, she was looking at a blueprint for change that might actually prevent the next tragedy. "I need to talk to Miguel," she said quietly. "This isn't just my decision." "Of course," Mayor Williams said. "Take all the time you need." Months later, on a sunny April morning, Sophia Rodriguez stood once again on steps, but these weren't courthouse steps. These were the steps of Washington Elementary School, where Emma had just finished her first week back in preschool since the incident. Miguel stood beside her, leaning on his cane but standing, really standing. His speech had improved dramatically, though he still searched for words sometimes. His memory remained fractured. Some days he remembered everything, some days he forgot what he'd eaten for breakfast. But he was here, present, fighting his way back to the family that needed him. "Is she ready for this?" Miguel asked, his words only slightly slurred now. "I don't know," Sophia admitted. "But she asked for it. And after everything she's been through, if Emma Rodriguez asks for something, I'm inclined to give it to her." Inside the school gymnasium, 200 children sat cross-legged on the polished floor, buzzing with the chaotic energy of 5-year-olds who'd been promised something exciting. Teachers lined the walls, maintaining order. Parents filled the bleachers, phones ready to capture what Principal Ramirez had billed as a very special assembly. At the front of the gym stood Officer Derek Kane and Titan. This was the 6th school they'd visited as part of the new Phoenix Police Department Community K-9 education program. At each school, Kane had explained how police dogs were trained, what they did, why they were important. He'd emphasized gentleness, respect, the partnership between handler and dog. He'd let carefully selected children pet Titan under close supervision. But today was different, because today Emma Rodriguez sat in the front row. Principal Ramirez approached the microphone. "Good morning, Wildcats. Today we have Officer Kane and his partner Titan here to teach us about police dogs. But before they start, we have a very brave student who wants to say something. Emma Rodriguez, can you come up here, sweetie?" Sophia's breath caught. This wasn't part of the plan. Emma had asked to attend the assembly, but Sophia didn't know she planned to speak. Emma stood up from the front row, her new yellow dress bright against the gymnasium's dim lighting. She'd chosen the dress herself that morning. Sunshine colors, she'd called them. The nightmares had decreased to once or twice a week. She laughed more now, played more. Her therapist, Dr. Martinez, said she was showing remarkable resilience. But resilience didn't mean the fear was gone. It meant Emma was learning to carry it. The little girl walked to the microphone, and Kane lowered it to her height. Emma looked out at 200 faces, then turned to look at Titan. The Belgian Malinois sat perfectly still, watching her with those intelligent eyes. "Hi," Emma said, her voice small but clear through the speakers. "My name is Emma, and I want to tell you about dogs." The gymnasium went completely silent. "Dogs are really good," Emma continued. "They love their people so much that they'll do anything to make them happy. Police dogs are the same. They're not mean or scary. They're just dogs who have jobs like how your mommies and daddies have jobs." She paused, twisting her hands together, a nervous habit she'd developed. "Something bad happened to my family. Police came to our house by mistake and they hurt my pappy. They shot our dog Max. It was really, really scary." Emma's voice wavered but didn't break. "For a long time I was afraid of all police dogs. I thought they were bad, but they're not bad. They're just doing what their people tell them to do." Miguel's hand found Sophia's in the bleachers. They both had tears streaming down their faces. "Officer Kane and Titan are here to teach you that police dogs can be helpers and friends, not just scary. And I want you to know that even when you're really scared of something, you can still be brave. You can still try to understand. You can still be kind." Emma turned to Kane. "Can I pet Titan now?" Kane's voice was thick when he answered, "Of course you can." Emma approached Titan slowly, her hand extended just as she'd done on those courthouse steps 4 months ago. But this time there was no crowd of reporters, no viral video in the making. Just a little girl and a dog, witnessed by 200 children who would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. Titan's tail wagged as Emma stroked his head. Then she did something that made every adult in the room catch their breath. She hugged him, wrapped her small arms around the big dog's neck and buried her face in his fur. "Thank you for being a good dog," she whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "It's not your fault. None of it was your fault." The gymnasium erupted in applause. Children clapped and cheered. Teachers wiped their eyes. Parents fumbled for tissues. Officer Kane knelt down beside Emma. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for teaching me to be a better officer, a better partner to Titan, a better person." Emma smiled at him, that beautiful, uncomplicated smile of a child who'd survived something terrible and chosen not to let it make her cruel. Later, outside the school, reporters gathered for a brief press conference. The settlement had been finalized 3 weeks ago, $2 million for the Rodriguez family. But more importantly, the Phoenix City Council had unanimously passed the K-9 Reform Act, codifying every change Chief Martinez had proposed. Implementation was already underway. 3 officers had been disciplined for previous K-9 deployments that violated the new protocols. The Civilian Oversight Board had reviewed 47 use-of-force cases and recommended changes to training procedures. Change was happening, real measurable change. Mayor Williams stood at the podium with Sophia, Miguel, and Emma. 4 months ago, a 3-year-old child said something that this city needed to hear. She said that dogs don't make choices people do, and when people make bad choices, other people have to make better ones. She looked down at Emma, who was holding both her parents' hands. Emma Rodriguez reminded us that accountability isn't about blame. It's about recognizing when systems fail and having the courage to fix them. Today, Phoenix is a better city because a little girl was brave enough to speak truth to power. Emma tugged on her mother's hand. "Mommy, can we go get ice cream now?" The crowd laughed, a release of tension, a moment of pure joy in the middle of something heavy. "Yes, baby," Sophia said, scooping Emma into her arms. "We can get all the ice cream you want." As they walked away from the cameras and the questions and the public attention, Miguel wrapped his arm around his wife and daughter. His steps were unsteady, his future uncertain. The trauma didn't disappear just because reforms passed. Emma would probably always carry some fear. Miguel would probably always struggle with his injuries. Sophia would probably always remember that terrible night. But they had each other, they had justice, they had change. And sometimes that was enough. 6 months later, the bronze plaque was unveiled in Washington Elementary School's main hallway on a crisp October morning. It read, "The Emma Rodriguez Courage Award, given annually to a student who speaks truth with kindness, who chooses understanding over fear, and who reminds us that even the smallest voices can change the world." Emma, now 4 years old and thriving in pre-kindergarten, stood beside it with Titan and Officer Kane. Max, fully recovered and sporting a new collar, sat on her other side. "Do you understand what this means?" Principal Ramers asked gently. Emma thought for a moment, then nodded. "It means other kids should be brave too, and kind, even when things are scary." "Exactly," Principal Ramers said. "Exactly right." Emma looked up at Officer Kane. "Are you still teaching Titan to be gentle?" "Every day," Kane promised, "and he's teaching me too." Outside, Phoenix continued its daily rhythm, but something had shifted. In police stations across the city, K-9 handlers attended new training sessions focused on de-escalation and community partnership. In City Hall, the Civilian Oversight Board met weekly to review use-of-force reports. In living rooms across America, families watched Emma's video and asked themselves hard questions about power, accountability, and change. One little girl had confronted a police dog and found the words that adults had been searching for. She'd spoken with a child's clarity about blame and choice and forgiveness. She'd reminded a city that systems were built by people, and people could choose to build them better. And in doing so, Emma Rodriguez had done something remarkable. She'd turned her trauma into transformation. She'd turned her fear into reform. She'd turned her pain into progress. not because she set out to change the world, but because she simply told the truth as she understood it. Sometimes that's all it takes. The end.